and I'd like to really welcome you all to tonight's very important meeting on Jeremy Corbyn, anti-Semitism and justice for Palestine. The way the meeting is going to work is the panel of 6 will speak for about 10 minutes each. If there is time, because we have to be out of here at 8:30, we will allow a few contributions, but we'll judge that as the meeting goes on. And I'd just like to say to you, all of you, if you need to, if we get to discussion, I'm the chair, democratically we have voices, make sure we go through the chair, and I hope that the meeting goes really well. So I'm going to introduce each speaker as they're going to speak, and I'm going to start with Lindsay German, who's convener of the Stop the War Coalition, and she needs to go to another meeting immediately, and she'll explain why, I'm sure. So a warm welcome for Lindsay German, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Anna, and thanks for inviting me and for organising this meeting. I'm afraid I do have to go. There's a launch of an Iraq Solidarity Month by a group of Iraqis, which they've been planning for a long time, and I'm sure everybody here understands the importance of keeping that issue very, very much highlighted. So I'll have to go and speak at that. But I wanted to come and speak here. I think it's a very, very important issue. I think it's something that, you know, if you'd asked me a year or two ago, what would this be about, a title which linked Jeremy Corbyn with anti-Semitism and Palestine, I would have been taken aback that we're even having to discuss this kind of thing. And it's actually something which I think is particularly problematic for people on the left. It's particularly upsetting for people on the left because we're people who I think all of us see as a principle that we're anti-racist, that we don't consider ourselves in any way racist, whether it's anti-Semitic or Islamophobic or anything else. Indeed, we spend a lot of our time arguing against these ideas and campaigning and fighting against these ideas. So I think it's a difficult question, and a question that people feel very, very strongly and very, very emotionally about, and I think that's totally understandable. It's understandable because anti-Semitism is an absolutely hideous form of racism. We know where it has taken us historically. We know the history of the Holocaust, and not just of the Holocaust, many, many examples, both before and since the Holocaust, of really horrible anti-Semitism, which is unfortunately growing again, certainly in parts of Europe, and certainly is supported by many people in government in parts of Europe. So this is a very, very serious question for us. It's also a question, I think, not just of looking at the ways in which Jews have suffered from anti-Semitism, but also the fact that Jews have been such an important part of the left and have gravitated to the left in so many situations. We always talk in this country about Cable Street in the 1930s, but it also seems to me, when I think about my political history, that Jews were disproportionately involved in the movement against apartheid in South Africa. They were disproportionately involved in the civil rights movement in the United States, and out of that, the women's movement and the anti-war movement and all those sorts of things. There is a fantastic record of Jews campaigning and fighting against injustice, and I think the idea that the left can be divided on this issue is something that we have to confront, and we have to discuss, and we have to try to overcome. And I hope in the few minutes I've got I can put forward a few things that I think we should be trying to do in terms of this. The first thing is to look at anti-Semitism as a problem inside the Labour Party. Now, it clearly is a problem inside the Labour Party. I'm not a Labour Party member. I have to say I haven't come across it myself from Labour Party members. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist, and there clearly are documented cases where it does exist. But I think it's important to put this in context, that anti-Semitism exists throughout society. Actually, if you look at surveys, there's more signs that exist on the right of politics than it does on the left, which doesn't justify anybody on the left holding anti-Semitic views or expressing anti-Semitic views or any of those sorts of things. But I think we always have to look at this overall, and it's something which is across every party. It's across the whole of society. It's something that is often justified in all sorts of ways which can't be justified. But it seems to me that we also have to put it in the context of other forms of racism. I mean, I saw the headline of the Evening Standard this week, which was Jeremy Corbyn, I apologise for anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. I'd like to know when the Evening Standard is going to have a headline apologising for its own racist campaign when Sadiq Khan stood for Mayor of London. And I have to say that the week when we've had all these horrific stories about Windrush and we've had this absolutely revolting regime in the Home Office increasingly exposed that had targets for immigration. I have to say that I think when we're talking about fighting racism, we have to look at it specifically. We have to look at individual cases, but we also have to say we live in a society which creates this racism and creates it not just through individuals behaving in a bad or an unacceptable way, but what the state does in terms of things like immigration laws and Islamophobia and the Prevent campaign against, which I'm sure Alex will talk about later on. So I think it's important to put it in this context. And I'd like to put forward two reasons, I think, why this has been blown up. It's an important issue, but it seems to me it's an issue that Jeremy Corbyn is trying to deal with, and that actually the former General Secretary of the Labour Party, who was opposed to Jeremy Corbyn, didn't deal with quickly enough, in my opinion. If there are cases of anti-Semitism, they should have been heard quickly. I think there's two reasons why this is leading the news and the BBC, why it's headlines in the Daily Telegraph and all this kind of thing. The first is, and there is no doubt in my mind about this, that there are many people who are concerned about anti-Semitism, but there are many people who are using this as a political attack on the left of the Labour Party. And I very much agree with the article that Len McCluskey wrote in the New Statesman today, where he said, you know, there are serious issues here, they need to be dealt with. This should not be turned into a scapegoating of absolutely everybody who disagrees over this kind of issue. It should not be turned into a political witch hunt of the left. And I think this is something that is going on. And when you look at the MPs, I mean, again, you had the protest over anti-Semitism a few weeks ago, and there was a protest which Rob was part of organising, kind of against that protest. The protest against anti-Semitism had Norman Tebbit in the demonstration. Now, come on, you know, I mean, really, if we're seriously talking about anti-racism and fighting anti-Semitism, let's look at who our real allies are, and let's look at the people who've stoked up racism of all sorts of different sorts over the decades. The second issue, and this is something that obviously goes very directly to what we do in Stop the War, because we've always supported the Palestine campaigns and we've always been in favour of justice for the Palestinians, and even the very big Iraq march, nobody remembers this now, but actually the second slogan of the very big march in 2003 was justice for Palestine, and it was always something that we took as very, very serious, and we were very we regarded it as very important. We built an absolutely huge movement in solidarity with Palestine. We've built a huge movement in this country. It's been attacked by the right going back, more than a decade now. It was attacked very, very viciously in 2009 over the Gaza issue, again in 2014. Now we've got the issue in Gaza of the return march and all the things that are going on and the shooting of Palestinians by the Israelis. And there is no question, I think, again, that one of the reasons that there is this issue of anti-Semitism is repeatedly raised is because people want to blur the lines between racism against Jews and criticism of the State of Israel. And in my mind, we should all be intelligent enough, grown up enough, and principled enough to be able to separate these two things out. And we have to be able to do so. We are not going to stop criticising Netanyahu. We're not going to stop criticising the settlements. We're not going to stop criticising what is going on in Gaza. We are going to continue to do this, and many Jewish people are doing this as well. You know, Natalie Portman, who was a famous actress who comes from Israel, wouldn't go to an awards ceremony where she was going to be presented by Benjamin Netanyahu. What was she attacked for? They said, this is borderline anti-Semitism because you won't go and meet a right-wing prime minister in Israel. This is the most fantastic kind of Alice in Wonderland politics, and it's the kind of thing that we should really reject. Just very, very quickly, one other point that I want to make. You know, when people are accused of anti-Semitism, I think if they feel that they haven't been anti-Semitic, it must be a feeling of great injustice that people feel. Then they say this is a smear. We're now told we can't say that we're being smeared if we're accused of anti-Semitism. In other words, people are being given no right to defence against whatever they're accused of. And I feel slightly strongly about this because a man called Matt Pound, who apparently works for Labour First, which apparently is a right-wing Labour organisation, he put, it's not a freak coincidence, this was on Twitter yesterday, that the anti-Semitism issue has blown up under Corbyn. His leadership campaign actively recruited from groups like Stop the War Coalition, which harbour anti-Semitic views. When he won, they were then encouraged to become full Labour Party members. Now, this is the kind of stuff, to me, that is a smear. It is a slur, it is a lie. There is absolutely no truth in any of those bits of that statement. I asked him to take it down, as usual. You get no response from these people. But we'll continue to pursue it. I think it's very important that people do have the right to defend themselves. Whether we agree with what they say, if they do have the right to defend themselves, and they have the right to a fair hearing, and I think it's very important we say that. So I'll just conclude by saying this. We have to be able, in this situation, to distinguish over three things. We are all absolutely opposed to anti-Semitism, and we have to do everything that we can to prevent anti-Semitism spreading. If that means people being expelled from the Labour Party who are anti-Semitic, I'm absolutely in favour of that course being followed. I think that's the important thing. We have to, secondly, be able to distinguish criticism of Israel and support from the Palestinians from attacks on Jewish people. It has nothing to do with attacks on Jewish people. It is a totally separate issue, and we have to be able to recognise that. Finally, we have to also be able to recognise when this issue of anti-Semitism is being instrumentalised in the way that it is by the right-wing media, in the way that it is by the right-wing MPs inside Labour, and the Tory party, you know, the party of appeasement and all the rest of it. We have to be able to recognise when it's being instrumentalised, and we have to say this is not the way that politics should go. And I'd like to say, on the 13th of July, we just heard today, Donald Trump is going to be in London. I hope we will be demonstrating, we can all put on the wall 10 reasons why we'd like to demonstrate against Donald Trump. But let's do it. One of the main things we need to do it for is for the Palestinians, sticking up for the right of the Palestinians, sticking up for their right to exist, sticking up for their right to return to their homelands. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Ghada Kami. She's a Palestinian author and activist, and she is going to be speaking for 10 minutes. So, warm welcome for Ghada. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much, everyone. Good evening. And special thanks to Lindsay, who gave that fantastic introduction, which I think I can hardly beat. And I thank you for your support of the Palestinians. Now, I was asked to speak about this, and I actually want to make two major points. The first point is that it has to do with the meaning of anti-Semitism, because the anti-Semitism that is being used in accusations against Jeremy Corbyn and some members of the Labour Party is a very special kind of anti-Semitism, and I think we need to be aware of this. Not long ago, the new anti-Semitism was where Jew hatred was equated with anti-Zionism. So if you were anti-Zionist, anti-Israeli, you were told that you were anti-Semitic. But I want to put to you that the meaning of anti-Semitism has changed yet again. Today, it equals support for the Palestinians. If you support the Palestinians, if you support Palestine, then you are anti-Semitic, according to this new definition of anti-Semitism. And that is the one that I believe is being used in the attack on Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party, on some members of the Labour Party. That's the first point I want to make. The second point I want to make is that when dealing with this kind of artificially whipped up witch hunt, there is only one way to deal with it. No appeasement. If you start to appease these people, they will always demand more and different conditions. They will change the rules. This is, I'm afraid, from a very long experience as a Palestinian activist with people from the Zionist lobby, the Zionist groups. That is what they do. Now, I believe that in understanding this anti-Semitism accusations in the Labour Party, we need to see it in that context. In that context, the context of being pro-Palestinian equating to being anti-Semitic. So, in the hysteria that's been manufactured in the Labour Party, I quite clearly, as has already been said, and I think many of you realize, the target is in fact Jeremy Corbyn. Why? Because of his support for Palestine. The idea that in Britain, in this country, there should be a major political party headed by an outspoken supporter of the Palestinians, who, moreover, might be in a position to become prime minister, is absolutely unthinkable to Israel and its supporters. We have to understand that. They'll do anything to make that not happen. That is the point the point I'm trying to make is that's the context this has to be seen in, and no shilly-shallying, no blurring, none of that. So, of course, we all know that Jeremy Corbyn was in a very difficult position because he's not only suffering from the attacks of this Zionist lobby, but he's also suffering attacks from his own members of parliament. This is a really unprecedented situation. If you look at the Tories, who are internally divided on just about everything, when it comes to anybody attacking the Conservative Party, they all close ranks. This is a lesson, I'm afraid, some members of the Labour Party, have not understood to be something that is their duty, and it is over and above whether they dislike their leader or not. So that's very difficult for Corbyn, I understand that. However, unfortunately, he didn't ask me, and he went down the road of appeasement. And he did that in various ways, as you know. The first of those, which in my view should never have happened, was the Chakrabarti report. He quite earnestly and sincerely, and I understand that, thought that he was dealing with people different to the ones that some of us know better are not the people he thought he was dealing with, and thought that if he was decent and honest and had a genuine, dispassionate inquiry into the issue of anti-Semitism in the party, it would be enough that would deal with this. And you know very well that the findings of that report was that there was no undue racism or anti-Semitism in the Labour Party over and above what happens in society. However, all that was ignored, and they moved on to the attack more and more. So it was followed up with an internal witch hunt inside the ranks of the party, with suspensions from the party, quite hasty, without due process, without taking due care that whether there was anything in it or not. That happened next. And to make matters worse still, he apologized and he agreed to meet with the leaders of the Jewish Leadership Council and the Board of Deputies, which he did yesterday, I think, or maybe the day before. I can't remember. But, of course, the point about that was, it proved my point exactly, that you don't appease because they want more. So, as you know, those leaders had the insolence to demand conditions of Jeremy Corbyn, which no party leader could possibly accept, in interference in the actual policies of the party and the way it works. They should have been, he should never have met them. Having met them, he should have thrown them out straight away. However, he was nice and so on and so forth. The result, they didn't like it. So they've been complaining, grumbling, criticizing him, and so forth. Therefore, I want to really end up on this because I'm told I haven't got much more time. I think, what should we do now, okay? Well, like the man in the Irish joke, I wouldn't start from here. But however, we are here. So what should he do? Well, first, call a halt to all this apologizing and witch hunts and investigations and suspensions immediately. Secondly, investigate. How about investigating the Conservative Party for its members who are anti-Semitic? How about that? What about making that the context, pointing out that the Labour Party is probably much better than the Conservatives? Well, we know it's better in that sense. And finally, next, get rid of those MPs. You know, I really, I know this sounds, would not please most people, well, many people. I just don't see there's a way further. There's a way forward with people like this, sniping and making plots against the leader. I really don't. There should be mandatory reselection. And finally, you've got to fight back. You have to fight back against these people. Will you give me one more minute to tell you, I've just been in the United States. I came back yesterday. I'm telling you, I was in California. I was told about the case of a woman lecturer, Palestinian, called Rabab Abdul Hadi at San Francisco State University. She has been targeted by the Zionists, who are very, very powerful, much more powerful than here. They'd got onto the university authorities. They want to get her sacked. Death threats. The woman had to actually stay at home. She was so frightened, and so on. What did they do? They filed a lawsuit against her and the university for hiring her for being anti-Semitic. In fact, she teaches a course on Palestine. But the point of this story is to tell you, I met two lawyers who are defending her. And what's happened is, she's come back fighting. She's got two excellent lawyers who have demolished the Zionists in the court and are hoping to actually get them fined. That's the way. That is the way that we have to do it in this country. And I hope very much that Corbyn listens to me wherever he is tonight and takes my advice. Thank you.
Thank you. That was brilliant. Our next speaker is Jonathan Rosenhead, and he's a member of Jewish Voice for Labour. Jonathan.
There is an anti-Semitism crisis in the Labour Party. Anti-Semitism is foul, malignant, and persistent, and it is everywhere in some quantity. However, the anti-Semitism crisis in the Labour Party has very little to do with anti-Semitism. It's about other stuff which you've already been hearing. It's not a crisis of there being too much anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, for, in fact, there is not that much. To start with what anti-Semitism actually is, it's actions and statements motivated by dislike or hatred of Jews, as Jews. Sorry, is that better? I'm so sorry. I'm not going to go back because I have no time. Dislike of them, of Jews as Jews. The gold-plated forms of this are things like Holocaust denial, the blood libel, conspiracy theories, protocols of the Elders of Zion, etc. And stereotyping. And approaches to humiliation, etc. So all of that is genuine anti-Semitism. It exists everywhere, but in doses of variable size. What we've heard already is the attempt to extend that to cover criticism of Israel and support for the Palestinians. What evidence is there that the Labour Party is so thoroughly infected with anti-Semitism? Well, we have postings on social media. Undoubtedly, there are some very anti-Semitic ones. Some of them are done by people who say they are supporters of Jeremy Corbyn. We don't know if they're members of the Labour Party. We don't even know if they are supporters of Jeremy Corbyn. If I was the Israeli government, I'd be running all sorts of false flag operations, getting people to post, and they have hordes of them in Israel doing this sort of stuff on the internet, saying things which will then discredit Jeremy Corbyn. There are some individuals, undoubtedly, because I met one or two, and there are more, who are genuinely anti-Semitic. The ones I've met have been more confused than anti-Semitic. They have said anti-Semitic things, written anti-Semitic things, without realizing that to say things about the power of Israel in a particular tone of voice or particular formulation could be seen as reasonably seen as anti-Semitic. They have been confused about where are the boundaries between criticism of Israel and criticism of Jews as Jews. And for that we need more education and more training. Undoubtedly, some of our movements have been infiltrated, particularly the Palestinian movement, by some people who are anti-Semitic, and we have to make it our business to get them kicked out with all due speed. I'd just like to give you a little story. Last week I was speaking in mid-Wales, in Paris. Little town, 3,000 people. There were 50 people in the audience. Mind you, some of them had come all the way from Ludlow to hear about the problem of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. They were from Labour parties in Shropshire, the ones who came, and half the people in the room were from the Labour Party. And a smaller number were Jewish. And I asked the people in the room who were in the Labour Party to raise their hands, and they said, and then I said, and could all those who have experienced anti-Semitism in a Labour Party meeting to put up their hands, and nobody did. I then asked the Jews in the room if they had experienced anti-Semitism, and they all said yes, as indeed if I would have put my hand up. I've experienced it 3 times in my life, which is more than I think any of the others in the room had. On the other hand, it had never happened to any of them in the Labour Party. There is this low-level anti-Semitism in the world outside, which has some resonance in the Labour Party, but not very much. So anti-Semitism exists. Labour Party is not really the centre of it. If we look at the statistics collected by a whole range of organisations, a Zionist organisation called Yachad, even the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, the police, the EU's Fundamental Rights Agency, we find the following. It's much more prevalent on the right. It's lower now in this country than it was in the 50s, much lower than the 30s, much lower than the 1890s. It's gone up a little in the last 5 or 10 years for various reasons, which I won't go into because I haven't got the time, but it is still really low, lower than almost anywhere else in Europe. And it's much lower, of course, than racism against blacks and Islamophobia. Many Jews have been unnecessarily scared by the leaders of their communal organizations. There are Jews who are genuinely frightened that the Labour Party, which might become the party of government, is actually riven with anti-Semitism. I asked them when I meet them, how do they know? And they said, well, everybody knows that. It's in the papers. But the ones who go to the meetings know it isn't true. So this is being spread through media means, and it's been an extraordinarily skillful operation. I think if I wasn't so moved by it in a negative way, I would congratulate them on the amazing operation they've run in the last few months. There's very little evidence, anecdotal at best, for most of the accusations of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. So, it's the anti-Semitism crisis is not about anti-Semitism, it's about how anti-Semitism is being used. There's another story going on, or actually 2 stories. The first story, the MPs. Most of you will have seen Len McCluskey's article in the New Statesman about the 30 or 40 MPs who wake up each morning saying, how can I undermine Jeremy Corbyn today? And that is almost exactly the number of MPs and peers who accompanied Ruth Smeeth to the hearing against Mark Wadsworth yesterday, accused of anti-Semitism at the anti-Semitism launch of the Chakrabarti Committee because they wish to undermine the report by staging something. So the MPs are a problem. And it's not the only problem. The other problem is the Board of Deputies and the Jewish Leadership Council. They are undoubtedly the prime Jewish community organizations. They have been taken over by the right wing. The recent chair of the Jewish Leadership Council is now the chief executive of the Tory party, etc., etc. They are behaving like trots, if you don't mind me saying so. They're engaging in transitional demands. They're making claims of Corbyn which he will not be able to agree to, but which will transform the debate and make him make some concessions, even if not those. So what they're trying to do is to make some things unsayable and to make Corbyn unelectable. They approached this meeting with Corbyn saying they would only meet him if he agreed to 6 preconditions. In the end, they didn't insist on those preconditions ahead of time. They insisted these 6 preconditions were on the agenda. And these were that they be allowed to participate in the selection of an independent ombudsman who would control the disciplinary process of the Labour Party. And that ombudsman would report to them as well as to the Labour Party. Absolutely impossible demands which were being made so they could say he hadn't agreed. The CLPs are not to invite speakers who have been suspended or expelled, and no MP should share a platform with them. That's to stop Ken Livingstone from being heard. There should be a fixed timetable for concluding all the cases of alleged anti-Semitism. Due process, natural justice goes out of the window. No right to appeal. It's all got to be wound up, and they all have to be found guilty. It's no good going through the process and saying some of these people didn't do it, or what they did requires training and not expulsion. They claim, they assert that the Labour Party must accept the full IHRA definition. I won't say what the initials stand for. The government adopted it in December 16. The Labour Party adopted it on the same day, but cannily they only adopted 38 words, which are so bland as to be meaningless. The whole point of the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism was that it listed 11 things that you must not say or refer to, and 7 of them were about Israel. So the Board of Deputies has finally rumbled that the Labour Party didn't actually accept the whole thing, and now they're demanding that it does. And what's more, that they should make a list of things which Labour Party members are not allowed to say, words they're not allowed to use, or they will be anti-Semitic, and those are words which should be based on the IHRA definition. Out goes free speech, not only in the Labour Party, but in the end in the country as a whole. They're trying to make certain things unsayable. One of the main things they want to be unsayable is the word Zionist. They want to be able to use it themselves as a wonderful, rich, warm-sounding thing that Jews can say to each other. If we say it, we're anti-Semitic. And, of course, we can't allow that to happen. Finally, Corbyn, of course, declined, as they knew he would, and as indeed he had to. But he didn't make any significant concessions, which is good. But the Board of Deputies can go on attacking him, which is not so good. They want to make anti-Semitism denial the equivalent of Holocaust denial. If you say that the claim of anti-Semitism is not genuine or is even a smear, then you are showing you're anti-Semite. They want to make it unsayable, not only the word Zionist, but that an anti-Semitism claim is not genuine. Hence, I may say, and this is my final point, hence the violent attacks they've been making on Jewish Voice for Labour. We were founded only in September last year. We have become the unofficial opposition within the Jewish community on these issues. And we threaten their narrative, that Jews are united in saying these things are anti-Semitic. We know they're not. There are hundreds of us now, and we're recruiting all the time. We're getting hundreds of thousands of hits on our website. You can help us hold that line. You can get your CLPs, if you're in the Labour Party, to affiliate. You can ask us for training, whether you're in the Labour Party or not, and we will deliver training and education in what anti-Semitism actually means. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Ben Jamal, who is director of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Okay, thank you. I think there's going to be quite a lot of overlap in what we're all saying tonight, and there's a lot of common points. But a lot of the debate has around the narratives of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party have been framed around understanding this as a function of attempts to destabilise Jeremy Corbyn. I want to look more broadly at actually what's going on as part of a wider pattern and a global pattern of the attempt to suppress activism for Palestine. Now, it's true, as we've heard, that we have got within the Labour Party a dynamic where those on the right who want to destabilise Corbyn and use any stick to beat him with are in alliance with people who have an ideological motivation to suppress any narratives in support of Palestinian rights, very often those are exactly the same people. But as I said, I want to look at this as a function of something broader. And it's important we have a good memory for those who think that these narratives about anti-Semitism in the Labour Party only started with the election of Jeremy Corbyn. Let me just quote you something from The Spectator. Community activists believe that the Labour leaders' position on Israel has become such a sticking point that many Jews who traditionally vote Labour cannot bring themselves to do so. One said, they have been forced to choose between their party and their support for Israel in a way they never thought they would be. Maureen Lipman declared that for the first time in 5 decades she would not be voting Labour. When was that? 2015. Who was it written about? Ed Miliband. Why? Because he had come under attack for criticising Israel's assault on Gaza in 2014 and for whipping his MPs to support the vote for the recognition of Palestine. So for me, the main dynamic, and it's important if we're looking at the question, what do we do about these narratives, is that we think strategically and we understand the strategy that is at work. And I think we need to put this in a certain frame. Now, I've been campaigning for Palestinian rights for 20 years or more. Many people in this room have been doing it longer. I don't know, I've never met anybody who is prominent in campaigning for justice for the Palestinians who at some time or another has not been called an anti-Semite. But what we have witnessed, and you can argue about where you put the timeline on it, as Rada said, we are engaged in a process where we are redefining or conflating anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. But what we've seen specifically, I would say in the last 10 years, is a much more systematic and strategic attempt to establish this narrative. You can draw the timeline when you want. I would say a key moment was in 2010 when an Israeli think tank called the Reut Institute published a report, launched it in the UK, said that boycott, divestment and sanctions was the biggest global threat to Israel's security. Launched that report in London because they said that the UK was the hub of the global solidarity movement. In 2015, Netanyahu effectively accepted the main recommendations of the report, appointed a man called Gilad Erdan as the Minister for Strategic Affairs with a very simple brief: coordinate global actions to suppress boycott, divestment and sanctions. We have seen the strategy unfold. There's various components: lawfare, the introduction of laws within Israel but across the world to suppress the right to engage in boycott, divestment and sanctions. We've seen that in the States, we've seen that across Europe, in France. We've seen attempts in the UK. The government attempted to introduce regulations to prevent local government pension schemes from divesting from companies complicit in the occupation. And some of you will know PSC took the government to court, won a victory in the judicial review which threw out those regulations. We've seen as part of the strategy a very focused attack in the UK, in the US and elsewhere on activism within universities, and a very specific attempt to close down Israel Apartheid Week. And overarching all of that, a narrative which has been framed as delegitimizing the delegitimizers. So in other words, reframing human rights activism as something else, as something hostile, as something bigoted, as something anti-Semitic. And as Jonathan has said, one of the key tools in fomenting that narrative is the use of this new definition. Actually, it's a reframe of an old definition of anti-Semitism, the IHRA definition, with the clauses, the examples of speech, as Jonathan said, most of them about Israel, that are regarded as examples of anti-Semitism. There are two that are crucial. One, that denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination, e.g. by claiming that the existence of the State of Israel is a racist endeavour. That's defined as an example of anti-Semitic speech. Secondly, applying double standards of Israel by requiring of it a behaviour not expected or demanded of any other democratic nation. The last of those is used to say, well, boycott is inherently anti-Semitic. Because if you're calling for a boycott of Israel and not simultaneously putting the same energy into campaigning for a boycott of other nations that are violating human rights, then you must, by definition, be anti-Semitic. The first is used to say that calling Israel an apartheid state is anti-Semitic. This narrative has become starker and starker. So about a month and a half ago, some of this stuff you can't make up. An alliance of individuals, Joan Ryan MP, 2 DUP MPs, the head of an organisation some of you will be familiar with called Sussex Friends of Israel, which has direct and indirect links with far-right fascist organisations like Britain First and the EDL, went to Downing Street, handed in a petition of 10,000 signatures calling for the government to take action to prevent students having events under the banner Israel Apartheid Week, because to do so, by the government's own definition of anti-Semitism, is inherently anti-Semitic. So, what do we do? There's lots of things we need to do, but I'm going to focus, I think, on 3 broad principles. The first is, be clear within the broad Palestine solidarity movement about the values of our campaign and ensure that our method of campaigning always reflects those principles. That means we stand resolutely against anti-Semitism, and I have no truck with anybody who says, well, I've never encountered anti-Semitism within the Palestine solidarity movement broadly, because I have. And there are those at the fringes of our movement who wish to articulate the cause for Palestinian rights through anti-Semitic narratives, through engaging in nonsense about Holocaust denial, or engaging in conspiracy theories about Israel's power that draw on anti-Semitic tropes. And we need to be clear, there is no place for you within our movement. We don't need you. Secondly, we need to make clear and expose the attempts to cut down, to prohibit legitimate speech about Israel. And to do this, we need to draw a broad alliance. We need the civil liberty organisations like Liberty standing by our side. Our call to them is not come next to us and hold the flag of Palestine, not stand next to us advocating for boycott. We'd love it if you did that. Our call is defend our right to make legitimate statements about the state of Israel. But thirdly, we need to recognise that the freedom of expression argument is not enough. If we are going to take this campaign mainstream, which is what we need to do, we do not want to be in the box that says, that's a dodgy opinion, but you should be entitled to say it. So it's important we devote our energy not just defending, for example, that calling Israel a state practicing apartheid is a legitimate form of speech. We need to devote our energy to saying it's an accurate form of speech. In other words, we need to get our conversation back to Palestine. Tonight, we're talking about anti-Semitism. We know why we're having to do that, but that is the conversation that Mark Regev and Benjamin Netanyahu want us to be having. Tomorrow, I'd like to be talking about the need to defend the rights of the peaceful Palestinian protesters in Gaza who once more are going to walk into the line of fire to be shot down in premeditated acts of murder. Everyone, finally, has a moral obligation to stand against all forms of racism. Our message is clear. If you declare yourself an anti-racist, then you stand firm against anti-Semitism, but you also stand firm against the racist policies and laws of the Israeli state, whether imposed upon those living under military occupation, whether imposed upon refugees through the denial of the right of return, or whether imposed upon Palestinian citizens of Israel denied the right to live with equality under the laws of the state. That is what real anti-racism demands.
And now I'm introducing Alex Kenny, who's an NEC member of my union, the NUT, and he's going to speak for 10 minutes.
Okay. You're right, sorry. Yeah, no, I'm fine. Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me to speak. As Anna said, I'm a NUT executive member. I teach in Tower Hamlets, and I'm speaking here. I'm bringing you the greetings of Kevin Courtney, our General Secretary, and Kiri Tunks, our President, our National President, who has been leading much of the work we've done in support of justice for the Palestinian people. It's always difficult going towards the end on a platform like this because some of what you were going to say, people have said, and people have said things that you think, oh, right, I'll try and expand on that. So this may be a little bit more disconnected than I had planned. But I think it's important what Ben said at the end, that we do have to recognise in our movement that anti-Semitism is real, just as other forms of racism are real, and that we need to fight it. And we need to challenge people who use the kind of things that Ben was talking about, the tropes about using the Rothschilds as examples of Jewish conspiracies. People who talk like that, we have to challenge. They may be talking like that through miseducation. They may be talking like that because they're overreaching and they haven't quite grasped some of the central issues about our work on Palestine. But we have to challenge them. We have to challenge them in a comradely way. But if they won't change, we have to say you don't belong in the fight for justice for Palestinian people. You don't belong in the fight against racism. What I think I'm getting from what Ben said, and what I think we have to think about, is how do we unite the struggle? How do we unite the struggle against anti-Semitism, the struggle against Islamophobia and other forms of racism, and the struggle with justice for Palestinian people? I think our movement can do that, but I think we have to have that serious discussion. So I want to talk about some of the work our union does on anti-Semitism, on racism, and why we think justice for Palestine, why that is so important to some of the work that we do. So in terms of challenging anti-Semitism, because it does come up from students I teach, it does come up and you have to challenge it. So our union, the NUT, has worked with the Holocaust Memorial Trust. We've developed teaching resources that go into schools. We've worked with Stand Up to Racism on their project on Auschwitz, taking visitors to Auschwitz, taking school students to Auschwitz, because I think it's really important that we don't let our young people lose sight of the uniquely awful event that the Holocaust was, and that we teach them about it and that we educate them about it. And I've been doing that recently with a Year 8 class. I've been using some of our materials and other materials produced by the Holocaust Memorial Trust, and I'm really pleased to say there's great excitement in our school at the moment because we've working with Wayman Bennett, we're bringing Alf Dubs to our school next week to talk to Year 8 boys about being a child of the Kindertransport and why that was important then, and why it's important now that we have a message to our government that just as our movement was demanding that we let the Jewish people in from Germany in the 1930s, that we should be letting the refugees in from Syria and not stopping them in Calais now. And I think that's how you start to unite the struggle. That's how you start to build the links. And I think we should be bold in saying that it was our movement that stood alongside the Jewish community in Cable Street that made that call for Jews to be let in from Germany. And our record, our union's record, as the record amongst the trade union movement in opposing anti-Semitism and opposing fascism is really important and something we should be proud of. This week we marked the anniversary of Blair Peach's murder. Blair Peach was the president of my union branch. He was killed in Ealing. He was an implacable opponent of all forms of racism, anti-Semitism and all forms of racism. And he was murdered on a demonstration, fighting against the far right and we should never lose sight of that. It was our movement in Brent recently when a mosque was attacked. It was our movement, people in our movement, that brought together the Muslim and the Jewish community to protest against that and organise a solidarity vigil outside the synagogue. It was a synagogue that was attacked. But it brought together the Jewish community and the Muslim community to say, we won't allow the racists to divide us. So we've got good examples of how we can unite the struggles. In my area, in Tower Hamlets, when the EDL have threatened to come. We've brought together the Jewish community and the Muslim community to say they shall not pass. They did not pass in the 1930s, and they will not pass in the 2000s. So Lindsay said I was going to talk about prevent, and I did mention something about, put some notes down about prevent, because just as we saw the Jewish people in Nazi Germany being othered, we are seeing Muslim people being othered now by this government, and it's the prevent agenda that is doing it. I'm really proud that my union took a motion, and it was really well reported in a balanced way, to say that the school's inspectors should not be talking to young Muslim children about why they're wearing a hijab. And that is something that we have to challenge. The prevent agenda is shutting down debate. We want to be debating these things in school, but it's shutting down debate in universities. People are starting to be scared about whether you can talk about these things. So the agenda, the prevent agenda, is silencing the debate in the way that Ben described. So it's really important that we challenge that, and we say that where people are talking about these things, they should be able to talk about them, because then we can challenge their ideas, whatever their ideas are. So that's very, very important. So, for the avoidance of doubt, our union is opposed to anti-Semitism, and we will challenge it wherever it comes up, and we think schools should be teaching about it. But we've never seen a contradiction between opposing anti-Semitism and supporting the rights of the Palestinian people to right the injustice that was imposed on them by British imperialism. And that's my answer when people say to us, why does the NUT talk about Palestine so much in all the other things that are going on? It's because of the role British imperialism played in imposing the settlement on the Palestinian people, and the role British and US imperialism plays in cementing that role, cementing that injustice and not challenging the injustice. If you want to read more about it, the Balfour Declaration by Bernard Regan is at the back. I said I'd plug it, and there I've plugged it, Bernard. He didn't know I was going to do that, actually. So now, some of the work we do. We say we're committed to opposing racism and to solidarity with the Palestinians in their endeavour to achieve self-determination. And I just want to talk about some of the work we do on that. We're an education union, so the focus of our work, much of our work, is on how children are treated in Palestine. And the way children, we do hold the Israeli government to account and our British government to account for not challenging it enough. We work with organisations like Defence of the Child International, and more recently with a charity called EduKid, who've helped us produce resources showing what happens to the children in Hebron, showing the real-life experience of Palestinian children having to travel miles to go to school and go through the checkpoints in the wall. Every year we send 2 delegations of members from around the country to Palestine, and these people come back changed. They come back changed by what they witness, changed by the brutal treatment of the Palestinians at the hands of the Israeli government, and determined to do something about it. So some of the things they see and hear about are shocking. The treatment of Palestinian children at the hands of the IDF and the Israeli government, some of whom have had the temerity to throw stones at armoured vehicles, is truly shocking. 800 children are arrested, detained and prosecuted every year, transferred to prisons inside Israel in breach of the Geneva Convention, hands tied and transported on the floors of military vehicles. Our people have read and heard testimonies of horrendous verbal and physical assaults, denied access to lawyers or independent adults to accompany them to interviews, many kept in solitary confinement for up to 29 days, and a 97% conviction rate, and people are then coerced into informing on others. This treatment of children by the Israeli army and the Israeli government has been found by loads of independent reports. The Foreign and Commonwealth Office, UNICEF lawyers have found Israel to be in breach of international law for this treatment of children. So we reserve the right, we will always reserve the right as an education union to condemn the Israeli government and to condemn our government's silence, and through their silence, their complicity in that treatment of children. So I'll finish with the words of Bassem Tamimi, who's one of our hosts when we go out and on these delegations to Palestine. to a packed room of people. These people are teachers. They give up a half term, they go, they don't know what they're going to see, and they are shocked by what they see, and many of them have an emotional response to it. So he was talking to a room full of people who were in tears, and he said, at what they'd seen and heard, and he said, "We thank you for your tears. We're very grateful for your tears, but they're not enough. Now you must go and do something." He asked us, and he asked people to raise their voices in defense of Palestinian children, defense of Palestinian people, and to let the government know that the Israeli government know that we're watching what we're doing. And that's what we will continue to do. We reserve our right to do that. So I want to end with where I started, really. I think our movement can solve the problems. We always say this. It's up to our movement to solve the problems. We have to challenge anti-Semitism. We have to challenge racism. We have to challenge Islamophobia. And if we unite those struggles, we can unite that with the struggle for justice for the Palestinian people. Thanks very much for inviting me.
So our last speaker before we open it up is Rob Ferguson, and he's an anti-racist and an anti-fascist activist, and he'll get the same 10 minutes.
Thanks. Well, I'm really pleased to be sharing a platform with prominent Palestinian speakers, a trade unionist like Alex from my own union, Lindsay from Stop the War, and not least Jonathan from Jewish Voice for Labour. Because I think that what is at stake here is of vital importance to all our movements and the entire left. And I want to talk about anti-Semitism, because I've found myself forced to reflect much on anti-Semitism over my political life, and not least in the last few months. I don't think I'm overstating things to say that my political outlook has been framed by the fact of anti-Semitism historically, and the Holocaust, and my own family history, not least the horror of genocide and loss. I'm not claiming a unique history. The horror is that it is far from unique. Anti-Semitism is not a free-floating prejudice. Modern anti-Semitism was forged as a foul, reactionary ideology during the late 19th century. And the anti-Semite portrayed every failing of society, social discontent, economic crisis, military defeats, all as the work of an alien, hostile force, the Jew. It was forged as a challenge, not least, to socialist ideas. Indeed, socialism was cast as an alien Jewish invention. And this foul ideology is once again on the rise, and from the ranks of those same forces. In my mother's native Hungary, where her sister perished in the Holocaust, this is how today's far-right Prime Minister Viktor Corbyn speaks of a Jewish menace. We are fighting an enemy that is different from us, not open but hiding, not straightforward but crafty, not honest but base, not national but international, does not believe in working but speculates with money, does not have its own homeland but feels it owns the whole world. Now I tell you, that could be ripped from passages of the great anti-Semitic forgery, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. And yet we have a foreign minister, Boris Johnson, who could not wait to congratulate Corbyn, who he's looked to as an ally over Brexit, to congratulate him on his victory as a partner and a friend. And we shouldn't forget either that in the European Conservative and Reform group, that the Tories are the biggest party, they sit with parties who promote anti-Semitism and Holocaust revisionism in their own countries. Now it's true, clearly, like any form of racism, that anti-Semitism can permeate the whole of society, including the left. It has to be challenged. There can be no place in the labour movement for it. It makes no difference if this happens in the context of debates over Israel or not. And there have been examples of anti-Semitism, real examples of anti-Semitism. Personally, I agree with Lindsay. I think they would have been dealt with by now if the Chakrabarti report had not been shelved by those who wanted to use the charge of anti-Semitism to settle political scores, regardless of whether individual charges were valid or not. And let's note just really 500,000, is it more, members now of the Labour Party. Relatively, I'm not in any way understating the seriousness of one example, but relatively few in number. We must deal with anti-Semitism when it arises on the left because it is unacceptable in itself, but also because we cannot tolerate any form of racism or prejudice. So I must say, I'm confused as to why the other day Labour MPs used a debate called by the most racist party in Parliament to address abuse and denounce Labour. After all, this is the party that created a hostile environment for the Windrush generation, whose MPs today stand shoulder to shoulder with Amber Rudd, who, in my view, should be thrown out of government and thrown out of Parliament for her racism and her lies. And on the anniversary of the murder of Stephen Lawrence, let's remember it was Conservative leader William Hague who accused the Macpherson inquiry of undermining police morale. And it is the Tory government that is creating a hostile environment not only for the Windrush generation, but for Muslim communities, asylum seekers, and refugees. And so I have a positive suggestion to make to Labour MPs and anyone. If you want to clean up dirt, please don't stand in the sewer. The truth is that we are seeing in British politics the narrative of something Garda referred to, of a new anti-Semitism that has detonated on a huge scale since the Second Intifada in 2000 and the Iraq War. This is the narrative that claims that support for the Palestinian struggle, and in particular anti-Zionism, is anti-Semitic. It is a narrative constructed to justify the dispossession of the Palestinian people, to attack the left, justify war abroad, and Islamophobia at home. It has also helped fuel the rise of the far right. It provides cover too for anti-Semites like Corbyn, the Alternative for Deutschland, the Front National in France, who use it to cast the cloak of support for Israel over their own anti-Semitic views. Anti-Semitism, at the end of the day, is neutral on the question of Israel. Anti-Semites will profess support or opposition to Israel, whichever cloth fits. They are anti-Semites. And anti-Zionism has existed amongst Jews as long as political Zionism has existed. The truth is that before the Holocaust, Zionism commanded support from only a small minority of European Jews. The Holocaust transformed that political terrain as the notion of a Jewish state appeared to offer sanctuary when in Europe's darkest hours there had been none. My own father went to Palestine with his family in the 1930s. He described himself as a socialist Zionist. He even joined the Haganah, the Zionist militia. But his experience, even then, before the Nakba, forced him to choose between his socialist principles of siding with the oppressed and his Zionism. And one thing I hate is this notion of a real Jew. It's an anti-Semitic notion. Jews, like everyone else, come in all types, with all views and beliefs. The only thing I hate more than the term self-hating Jew is a non-Jew telling me that to be anti-Zionist is anti-Semitic. And in a very real sense, I'm anti-Zionist, not despite, but because of the Holocaust. In a sense summed up, I think, by Marek Edelman, one of the leaders of the Jewish ghetto Warsaw uprising, who said, "With the oppressed always, with the oppressor never." Having said that, though, my own family is and was both Zionist and anti-Zionist. And let's remember one thing. It made no difference at the gates of Auschwitz. And like Lindsay, I'm glad Len McCuskey called out the witch hunt yesterday. But let's be clear, it has wider implications beyond Labour. We need to confront it without giving an inch on confronting real anti-Semitism from wherever it comes. The stakes, in my view, are very, very high. One only needs to look across Europe at the perils of division between Muslim, Jew, and the left. Here, France holds out a lesson. The biggest electoral base for fascism across Europe. Partly a direct result of letting those divisions fester. And the beneficiaries of those are those who would like to see a return of the jackboot into European politics. And against that threat, we have to unite, even sometimes regardless of our views on Israel and Palestine. But I believe that that means this cynically motivated onslaught on Corbyn and the left must be fought openly and across our entire movement.
Okay, everyone. Yes, we now do have time for contributions. So what I'm going to do, I hope you don't mind, if you could come up, I'll call you up in groups of two. No, I will call you up in groups of 2 or 3, and we'll use this mic.
Cheers. Pete Furman, I'm a member of Hampstead and Kilburn Labour Party, which is one of those CLPs where basically it's trench warfare. We have, not only do we have Moshe McIver in the CLP, who was witch hunted and reinstated after a campaign, but we have several leading lights of the Jewish labour movement who regularly accuse us of anti-Semitism. One of them, a councillor until recently who works for the Board of Deputies, has accused us of institutional anti-Semitism, not accusing individuals, accusing the party, and particularly the branch I'm a member of institutional anti-Semitism. The crime is that we've brought several resolutions to the constituency, mainly about Israel-Palestine, occasionally about anti-Semitism. The irony of that is that all of those resolutions, bar one, were written and brought to the constituency by Jews, by anti-Zionist Jews, and on most occasions the Zionists didn't even oppose those resolutions. But the fact we brought several resolutions, along with things about supporting the McDonald's strikers and so on and so forth, proves the case that we're anti-Semitic. That accusation may well be sitting in the in tray of London Labour Party for them to act on after the council elections. We don't know. But the appeal that we have to concentrate on support for the Palestinians and so on, I agree with, but it underestimates the problem we have in the Labour Party, where actually the Zionists do everything they can to prevent discussion of that and divert it onto the anti-Semitism. So say anything about Israel-Palestine and you're anti-Semitic. And they never get into discussion, defence or whatever of the Israeli government's actions. We need to be aware of that. The other thing is, I hate to disagree with a couple of the platform, but both Garda and Rob said about the MPs and how they need to unite behind Jeremy and they shouldn't be agreeing with the Tories on anti-Semitism. Those MPs hate Corbyn. They probably hate the Labour Party to the extent they don't care about those things. Their prime aim, as Len McCluskey says, is actually to see Corbyn defeated. They don't care if we lose the council elections. They don't care if they play to the Tories. In fact, they like doing that. And we need to be aware of how bad our evil, how much they want to undermine the party. On the Board of Deputies demonstration the other week was a whole bunch of leading councillors, Labour councillors, from Barnet, where they hope to take the council off the Tories. Those councillors were siding with the Board of Deputies in an anti-Labour, anti-Corbyn demonstration. That is the extent to which they will go, and I think we need to be aware of that. The other thing, briefly, is complicity of the media in all this. I was on the lobby yesterday in defence of Mark Wadsworth outside Church House down in Westminster.
If you could wind up now, I should have said
those MPs went in, including Alf Dubs, unfortunately, and the BBC caption on that was a cordon of MPs protecting Ruth Smith, as if we were about to attack her. We were stood there in silent protest, holding placards, but they were protecting Ruth Smith. We have to call out the media and try and work with the NUJ on these issues as well.
Charlie Kimber, the editor of Socialist Worker. Theresa May has, over the last year, had an extraordinary ability every week to reach a new crisis and then the next week to get even lower. Except one exception, and that has been the 2 or 3 weeks in which the anti-Semitism question dominated the media. The heat was taken off Theresa May precisely by the actions of those Labour MPs and by the media consorting around them. And it's nothing to do with the Labour Party's internal mechanisms. It is to do, as was shown by the raising of the IHRA definition, about pushing back against BDS, about the defence of Israel, and about trying to break the movement of solidarity with the Palestinians. And in that context, Garda is absolutely right. It is disastrous to retreat. Jenny Formby was wrong to put out an email saying don't hit back against the slurs of anti-Semitism. Corbyn's best moments have been when he has been on the front foot, when he has gone out and campaigned and had mass rallies and spoken about things. And Corbyn should not be retreating. Corbyn has to come out and fight around this question and not concede to people. And I was very pleased to see Len McCluskey's article, but I'll tell you, Keir Starmer was off the blocks immediately, denouncing McCluskey and saying that he was part of the problem around anti-Semitism, and Jeremy Corbyn will be asked, whose side are you on? Are you on McCluskey's side or are you on Starmer's side? And he has to come out and say, Len McCluskey was absolutely right to say what he did around those questions. Finally, we too can become defensive. It's not only right to say that we can criticise the policies of Israel or criticise Benjamin Netanyahu, although of course we should. We also should have the right to and should energetically campaign for BDS. We should energetically campaign for the recognition of Israel as an apartheid state. We should say Zionism has led to the creation of a racist state in Israel. And we should also say the solution has to be one state in which Jews and Palestinians live together. And it's not wrong to say those things. It's not anti-Semitic to say those things. And we have to campaign for those sorts of things. One final point. I know that there are 2 crucial anti-racist demonstrations next weekend. On Saturday, there's a demonstration on the 5th of May around the question of the Windrush scandal. And on the 6th of May, the Sunday, we will be taking on the Football Lads Alliance, a racist, Islamophobic and anti-Semitic organisation. I know that the people who attack Corbyn won't be on those demonstrations. Those of us should be on those demonstrations as part of showing we are anti-racists, we are people who take on anti-Semitism, and we fight for the rights of Palestinians.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all the speakers. My name is Nicola Branch. I've just come back from Palestine. I was out there with somebody here called Michael Colston, and there were 28 of us, and we were cycling to raise money for medical aid for Palestinians. Lewis has very kindly said that at the end I can fundraise. So I've got a bucket here if anyone wants to donate towards medical aid for Palestinians, because that really is one way that we can actually help and support the Palestinian people. I know that also Lewis is going to ask for donations for the room, so I don't want to take money away from that, but if anybody has any spare cash, then please do put in the bucket. We cycled 250 kilometres the length of Palestine, so I'm a little bit weary, but I can still stand here and hold up a bucket. Thank you.
At Broomfield, I'm a member of the Green Party. I live in deepest Hampshire. There's very little discussion, anything like this, so I have to come to London to get involved in it. There's something going on that you can try to get letters in your local press, but that's when you get accused of being an anti-Semite. I've been accused of being anti-Semite for putting a pro-Palestinian, a PSC flyer in my church magazine, so yes, Ben, I agree with you. I think there are jackboots in Europe. I think it's called NATO. In my view, NATO are the biggest terrorists in the world right now, and I think they are close to this dystopia which you're talking about. And I'm not quite sure I agree with you on kicking out all the 40. I know this may come as a shock. Kicking out these 40 Labour MPs who are against Corbyn. I think Jeremy's got a very difficult job here. Watching him do what he's doing, I think he's got to tread a fine line. He's not these fine speakers who are here today. He's not one of the stormtrooping speakers. He's got to rise above being directly involved, because if he does come to power, he's going to have quite a difficult job to do. So I think I wouldn't be too concerned about him being not appeasing or coming out against some of these MPs and saying, I'm with Len McCluskey, I'm not with Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer's on his cabinet, Len McCluskey isn't, so he's got a very difficult job in balancing things there. And I think he's doing okay. I think it's going to work out well.
Thank you.
Very respectable leaders and orators and analysts who spoke, and ladies and gentlemen. My name is Amanullah Khan. I would like to say that we should have a very, very strong, invincible narrative, carefully crafted and made realistically against fascism. Fascism, whether it is in England, whether it is in India, or in Israel, or in any country, deserves condemnation. And it has to be condemned in unequal terms, We must have a very strong, invincible terms, like the Communist Manifesto of 1848. A very clear, crystal clear clarion call, to crush fascism, because all these problems, they were created fascism. And there cannot be any kind of resurrection of fascism wherever it occurs, whether Israel or any other country, or for that matter, even the United States, As far as Jeremy Corbyn is concerned, I'm a veteran political worker. I'm from Pakistan. I've been to death cell, for freedom of expression. I think the world is today very fortunate. He's not a politician. He is a statesman. If he becomes the Prime Minister of this country, even the world will be saved from World War III. I'm not being emotional. And we must have socialism, but no compromise on fascism.
I want to talk about the importance of the contribution of Jonathan Rosenhead from Jewish Voice for Labour, because something very important is going on. It's been referred to, but I want to really underline it, which is we're seeing the emergence publicly of two Jewish traditions. Now, there's always a Jewish tradition which was about dissent, of dissenting from the dominant Jewish tradition. This is beginning to emerge in the Labour Party with the Jewish Voice for Labour, who are picking up a lot of support right across the country. And that is absolutely infuriating the traditional Jewish leadership, the Board of Deputies and the Jewish Leadership Council that met Jeremy Corbyn the other night. I think I'm right in saying that you, Jewish Voice for Labour, were invited first and then weren't allowed to go, as the condition was they wouldn't meet with Corbyn if you guys were allowed to go. Is that correct? Well, anyway, it was a condition that they were desperate to try to impose if they possibly could. But the importance of this is incredible, because what it really means, if we can get this, despite the fact the left appears to be on the back foot about this, there's no reason for us to be on the back foot. I completely agree with Rada and others who talked about no appeasement. It's the advisors of Corbyn, rather than Jeremy himself, I'm sure it is, who don't seem to understand it's possible to win the argument. It's possible to win an argument against anti-Semitism, in favour of Jewish people, and against Israel. It's possible to win that argument. It's not that difficult. It takes some thought, but there's a lot been written about, but that's an argument that needs to be put, and it's being put by Jewish Voice for Labour, and it's being put by other anti-Zionists and non-Zionists, Jews and non-Jews, outside the Labour Party. It's been a very strong movement. Indeed, one of the reasons why the Israelis have started this campaign to try to reverse this movement is because of the success of the boycott, disinvestment, sanctions campaign. So I would say to Jeremy Corbyn's advisors, change the tactic, change the strategy. Start talking about the need for a debate. The Labour electorate, working class people who vote Labour, are perfectly capable of understanding that shift. They're perfectly capable of understanding a voice that begins to say, yes, it's true, Labour Party has always supported Israel historically. It's absolutely true. A majority of Jews in the Labour Party support Israel. But that's now beginning to change. There's a significant number of Jewish supporters of Labour who don't support Israel. And we're going to give them an equal voice. We're going to have a debate in the Labour movement, in the trade union movement, up and down the country, and it'll be a fair debate, but we're going to insist on that dissenting voice, a Jewish voice for Palestine, as much as a Jewish voice for Labour is going to be heard. I think that argument, despite the fact we're on the back foot, can be won. But we need to get the Jeremy's advisors to understand that and begin to shift the terrain.
Hi everyone, my name's Nathan Janogly. I'm the current UCL president of the Jewish Society. This has been a highly enlightening conversation, having listened to. Just trying to see it from a Jewish perspective here. A lot of talk has been talked denouncing anti-Semitism and how we must stand up to it and how we cannot accept it, and we need to have zero tolerance. What we find very frustrating, what I find very frustrating as a Jewish person is somehow the case of Ken Livingstone has just been left gone underneath the scenes. He claimed that Hitler was a Zionist. Now, I recently went on a trip to Auschwitz, and please, let me finish.
Make his speech. Don't shout out. Let him have his speech. We'll have a right to reply, a minute each from the platform at the end.
This has stopped working. In preparation for my trip to really understand how anti-Semitism can grow and lead to the horrors of the Holocaust, I invested time in reading Mein Kampf. Now I just want to read 3 quick sentences that seem to really prove beyond proof that Hitler was very much not a Zionist. He says, for those Zionists who try and make the world believe that the Jews want a place in Palestine, they don't. What they are really aiming is to establish a central organisation for their international swindling and cheating. Now, I don't know about you, but that sounds like clear proof that Hitler was very much not a Zionist. I'm willing to hear from the speakers. I would be interested to hear from the speakers what we think we should do with Ken Livingstone, having made statements like that you said mentioned about facts, where clearly the facts themselves, written in 1929 in Mein Kampf, show that Hitler was very much not a Zionist.
Thank you. What I'm going to do, thank you, is I'm going to allow a right reply for these 2 speakers who expressed just a minute or 2 each, and then I'll make the announcement so that we can finish the meeting. Okay? Thank you very much. It's really not.
Hitler was an anti-Semite. Shock, horror. I didn't know that. What Livingstone told a lot of people was that for a period in the 1930s, the Nazi movement and the Zionists, particularly in Germany, collaborated because they had a common interest, not because Hitler was a Zionist, which actually he didn't say. Hitler and his movement wanted the Jews out of Germany. The Zionist movement wanted them into Palestine, as it then was. They were very determined about this. For example, just before the outbreak of war, the United States had organized for hundreds of thousands of Jews to escape from Germany and go to, not to the United States certainly, but to a number of Latin American countries that had agreed to have them. And in those last few weeks before the war, the Zionists stopped that from happening, because a Jew who got out of Germany and didn't go to Palestine was a Jew lost. And the result was hundreds of thousands of Jews who would have escaped did not. Now, that collaboration between that there was between the Nazis and the Jews and the Zionists, ended when there was the British government commission which said, we think we should now move to set up a state for the Jews. And at that moment, Hitler stopped, because he wanted the Jews out of Germany. He did not want them to have their own state.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and a couple of minutes from Rob.
Oh, right.
No.
Look,
hold it down a bit. Yeah.
Okay. I don't want to cover the same ground regarding Livingston that Jonathan has done, but I want to widen it out a bit. Because, you see, I am against, personally, I'm opposed, I avoid bracketing Zionism and Nazis and the Nazis together, because it can confuse historically the victim and the perpetrator, even when that is not intended to be the outcome of the argument. But this touches on something wider, doesn't it? Which is, I've come across myself examples where, Israel or particular figures are compared to Hitler and the Nazis. I'm actually against that kind of comparison, but I have to say that the devaluation of the experience of Hitler and the Holocaust does not begin around those discussions about Palestine, Israeli policy and so forth. It begins with every attempt by the major imperialist powers to overthrow someone they don't like, democratic or not. Every leader that you care to mention who has been deposed, invaded, has been termed by the major powers as the new Hitler, particularly in the Middle East, from Nasser on. That's where the devaluation and degrading of the historic experience of fascism, of the Nazis, of the Holocaust begins. Not surprising, then, that people pick up on that use of the comparison. And finally, one has to say, there's another source of that comparison, and that is the Israeli government itself, whenever it talks about the Palestinian leadership, whether it be Yasser Arafat, Hamas, and so forth, constantly comparing the oppressed and the dispossessed to the Nazis and so forth. I'm sorry, this is an obscenity. So I'm against using those terms, but I'm also for contextualising how that happens. The last point I'll say is this. I want to repeat the point. I think that what we're facing is something that has to be contested, because if it drives through the kind of divisions we've seen in France, where 300 celebrities and dignitaries signed a letter saying that it was the Muslim communities responsible for the ethnic purging of Jews in French cities, while the National Front laughs, the Front National laughs there on the sidelines, that is where this narrative leads, and we have to oppose it. I agree with the point about Jenny Formby's email. This is a mistake, and I know it's drilling down into a witch hunt at local level and on the ground, leaving people undefended, alone and isolated, and this has to stop. And I hope people start to come together to rally along the lines that people have argued for from this platform and from the floor.